Welcome to TSAT. Today I am going to discuss about natural disasters in disaster management in the context of disaster management. So here especially I am going to discuss now about cyclones, floods and drought. So in this context we need to know what a cyclone is. So in the case of a cyclone is generally originated in the ocean. So this is basically generated because of a low pressure. So this low pressure is created or generated because of a high heat. So because of this high heat, what happens is as been shown in the picture to you, the density of air decreases. When the density of air decreases, the weight decreases. So the surrounding cold air away from this hot region, the cold region, dense air rushes into this low pressure region and pushes the air upwards. So this leads to the development of a cyclone. So the rushing in air from the surrounding regions develops a kind of whirlpool leading to the development of a cyclone. So here this cyclone, the whirlpool, the movement of this air from a region to region happens based upon the pressure gradient of a region. So in this process of the movement of air in a circular pattern of whirlpool condition moves from place to place on the basis of pressure gradient in the atmosphere. So in this process, one of the basic fundamental factor as far as the origin of the cyclone is considered, always a cyclone originates in the ocean where there is a highly heated region. So in this process, this whirlpool which is being developed by the pooling up of water, what happens is by the pooling up of water, what happens is by the pooling up of air to the low pressure region, gradually what happens is the air turns into a kind of whirlpool, and this whirlpool kind of air vortex moves to the low pressure direction. So in this process, what happens is this whirlpool moves from place to place on the basis of low pressure direction towards the land. In this process, what happens is the wind velocities, when they are increasing based upon the pressure gradient, the more the pressure gradient, the more is the velocity of the wind. In this process, when the whirlpool is moving towards the land, what happens is there will be a kind of friction developed between the air and the ocean. In this process, the water is being rushed towards the coast, leading to a condition known as storm surge. Storm surge happens at a localized place where the cyclone travels from the ocean to the land. So in this process, what happens is the water will be rushed into the land, inundating the region at the point where the cyclone crosses from land to ocean. In this process, the inundation at that point of storm surge will be more and the destruction will be maximum, because the water here being accumulated is because of storm surge and because of precipitation. So the rest of the region apart from this whirlpool is being inundated because of the precipitation being caused by the cyclone and the wind velocities. So in this case of this cyclone, what happens is at one end of the cyclone, in this process of movement of cyclone in a circular pattern, will be having a opposite direction of wind flow on the other side. So because of this, the structures, when the cyclonic whirlpool is passing on the land, weakens the structure when the wind is flowing in one direction, and when the wind is passing to the second direction, when the whirlpool is moving, completely destructs the physical structures and trees and uproots the vegetation, leading to destruction. So here in this process, what are the precautionary measures need to be taken during the cyclone as part of disaster management? How the cyclone need to be managed? So in terms of disaster management, in terms of cyclone, you need to have an alternative mechanism of communication and prediction. So with the help of satellite mechanism, we must be able to predict the occurrence of a low pressure trough. You must be able to estimate whether a low pressure trough can be converted into a cyclone. and this information which you have gathered to satellite technology need to be communicated to the respective region which is going to be impacted. So, the existing kind of communication systems right now which we have got, the cell phones etc., which depend upon the existing communication systems with the help of signal towers, when they are being destructed by the cyclones, will not function. So, you need to have an alternative communication mechanism like a satellite phone or a radio communication, which can work even in the absence of the existing type of signal towers. Deforestation prevention, you must avoid deforestation so that the vegetation can be increased. When the vegetation is increased at the coastal regions, the physical impact of the storm can be stopped. Floods can be prevented because of cyclone, because the rate of percolation can be increased. Coastal shelters need to be constructed. Coastal shelters need to be constructed at the highest place elevation possible in the coastal region, so that the people who doesn't have a permanent pakka houses or a region which has been inundated need to survive in. So, because of this reason, when you have a cyclone shelters constructed at the higher elevated regions, the people can save themselves living in these coastal shelters temporarily. Encroachment of beaches must be avoided, because when there is no proper local administration, encroachment of beaches happens. This leads to increasing in the loss of life and property, because when these cyclones impact the beaches, when you are allowing human habitations, the loss of life and property will be maximum. So, in terms of disaster management of cyclones, construction of human habitats in the beaches must be avoided. Legislation must be made locally and regionally where they are being impacted by cyclones. Vulnerable states have a strong storm surge. So, you need to know certain vulnerable states. Only certain coastal states of our country are being impacted by cyclones, especially the coast, east coast and west coast. So, these states need to be warned. IMD, Indian Meteorological Department, tracks cyclones and warns. So, the image which I have shown to you will be tracked by this IMD department, so that it will be able to estimate a range of region of a coast being impacted, so that a particular section or the length of the coast need to be evacuated, so that you can save life and property with this kind of activity, with the advanced information you have got. And you need to depend upon certain radio information. So, carrying radio becomes very easy, where the existing cell phone system doesn't work during these disasters. You need to carry dry food and water, because dry food will have long shelf life. Water is essential for survival. So, the water is even available during cyclone is highly contaminated, causing diseases and dysentery. So, pure water carrying for life saving is essential. Dry food which has got more shelf life is essential, which is being stored in polythene bags. Tea powder is essential, because tea powder has got the nature of avoiding dysentery and loose motion. So, tea powder plays a very important role. So, apart from this we call it as 𝗧𝗧 powder or the 𝗧𝗧. Cumin seeds can avoid dysentery for a temporary duration, so that what happens is you can save life, because the water balance or the homeostasis in your body can be maintained without losing minerals and water. When you have these kind of materials, when you are able to store within yourself to save your life. And the least critical activities in vulnerable region means you must allow certain activities only in a region which is being subjected to cyclone or inundation. For example, grazing animals can be avoided when you relatively compare with agriculture or habitations. So, when the land is only just allowed for grazing animals, apart from human habitations, the loss of life and property can be avoided. So, the vulnerability can be reduced when the mode of utilization of a region is being demarcated. In terms of administration, destruction can be minimized. Effective forecasting mechanism is required. So, satellite communication is more essential rather than the traditional mode of communication, because when you have the information in advance, you can save yourself. So it is a necessary event where to the vulnerable section, making the information to reach as soon as possible is more important. To move away from the disaster is very important here in the case of cyclone. So certain essential goods or materials need to be with us to save ourselves, like torch, baby formula, people, very young children who depend upon milk. For them to survive, you need to have baby formula or the milk powder. Certain gloves you need to have, portable radio, waterproofing bags to store some dry food, non-perishable food. Next is spare batteries for torchlight. So these kind of first aid kit, these kind of essential aspects need to be stored for saving ourselves in expectation of a disaster, to save ourselves. So this disaster causes storm surge and destructs the houses, inundation of the regions, inundation of the farmlands. Loss of life is the main damage caused by cyclones. We have got the NDRF forces with pre-positioning the essential infrastructure required in the process of predicting and estimating the occurrence of a disaster. The pre-positioning of NDRF forces and pre-positioning of essential resources to save life with an alternative mechanism of transportation known as logistics plays a very major role in management of the disaster during this duration. Medical equipment, medicines, infrastructure, transportation system, and mitigating the impact. When the roads are being blocked, they need to be cleared immediately. For an efficient transportation system is a mitigative mechanism. Cyclone shelters, sometimes the public schools or any other constructions can be used to save the public. This is a cyclone shelter. A primary health center is being used here as a cyclone shelter in two ways whenever essential. Next, floods, the disaster management essential regarding floods. Causes of floods. So continuous heavy rainfall is one of the reasons for floods. So right now we are experiencing heavy rainfall. So this is heavy continuous rainfall when the land is saturated with water, when the land's capacity to absorb water is completed because of continuous rainfall, the surface runoff suddenly increases, leading to floods. One of the reasons for this is continuous heavy rainfall. Next is bad drainage facility. Drainage here implies that the way the water flows in terms of natural streams and rivers, and apart from the sewage, both drainage mechanisms in terms of natural water flow and second in terms of the sewage, when they are being maintained improperly, leads to floods. So for example, in the case of natural drainage mechanism, when we have got human habitations into the floodplains and the banks of the river and the banks of these different tributaries, what happens is when there is heavy downpour because of the cloud burst, when the precipitation is more than the volume of the river channel, it leads to overflowing of the river, leading to flooding. So when the drainage pattern is perfect, when the catchment region or the river banks are not allowed to have human habitation, the loss of life and property can be avoided. So having a better vegetation maintains a good drainage pattern, holds the precipitated water better. So in the case of urban floods, when the drainage is not being cleaned properly, when the drainage is being clogged by polythene sheets, etc., leads to bad drainage pattern. Blockage by landslides. So what happens is, in the river valleys, what happens is when there is a landslide, the river is being blocked by an iceberg or a rock or a landslide, acting as a temporary dam. So when the water being accumulated weight gradually increases because of the landslide, when the landslide blocks strength is less than the increasing weight of the water being logged at the backside, suddenly the rock breaks and leading to flash floods. So, one of the reasons for flash floods is blocking of the river channel. The second reason for flash floods is cloud bursts. Cloud bursts happen because of a type of cloud formation known as cumulonimbus clouds. The classic example happened a couple of days ago in the 𝗪𝗏𝗧, for example, is because of a cloud burst happened leading to destruction and death of many people in the valley. Narrow necks of the river channel. So, what happens is the width of the river channel will not be the same always because of the topographical features. At a point the river width will be less, at a point the river will be wider. So, to accommodate the water in the narrow region, the velocity of the water increases. So, at this point of time, when there is more precipitation and flash floods and cloud bursts, there are narrow necks leads to a fast moving of water leading to flooding of the region. Changing river courses, what happens is in the plain regions when the terrain is made up of depositional activity of alluvium, what happens is alluvial soil, the course of the river changes because of increasing the energy of the river, because of increasing in the volume of the river, leading to spreading of the river to new regions into the human habitation in the river bank zones. Destruction of mangrove forest and deforestation is one of the reasons for floods because they prevent weathering and erosion. Rapid urbanization. So, because of the fast increasing in urbanization and when the sewage is not in accordance with the increasing in the density of population, what happens is whenever it precipitates, the volume of the drain will be smaller than the precipitated water and the water usage because of the increasing in the population leading to clogging, leading to flooding. These are the different causes of floods. So, floods are being classified as the riverine floods, coastal floods, urban floods and flash floods. Riverine floods because when the precipitation is more than the capacity of the volume of the river channel, might be because of a cloud burst or because of the formation of a temporary dams because of landslides. Coastal floods because of heavy rainfall, a cyclone or storm surge. Storm surge is dragging of the ocean waters into the coastal regions because of the frictional force of the velocity of the wind during cyclones. Flash floods because of cloud bursts. So, another reason for the floods is 75% of the rainfall in our country happens within 3 months of the monsoon season, because of which the percolation rate reduces because of heavy precipitation. 12% of land in our country is prone to flood. 1/5 of the deaths of floods are happening in India, which is a very alarming rate in India. So, there are certain benefits of floods. So, what are the different benefits of floods? We have got different benefits of floods. So, soil fertility increases because of the weathering and erosion from the higher elevated regions. The lower elevated regions gets accumulated with different sediments containing minerals and fertilizers naturally available. So, the fertility of the soil increases because of the collection and deposition of different minerals from different regions. Rise in the groundwater level is an advantage, promotes plant growth is an advantage because of the availability of water later. Biodiversity in swamps, because of more increasing in the availability of water, the different aquatic environments, swamps, wet zones, what happens is the biodiversity increases because of the availability of water in terms of plants and animal life. This is another advantage of floods. So, in this process, in the terms of mains especially, whether it is a flood prone region or a cyclone prone region or a drought prone region, drawing a map to the quarter of your page is very much important, mentioning the regions which are being subjected to the specific disaster. So, for example, the map which is being depicted to you is a flood prone region, identifying the different regions of your country which are being subjected to floods. So, for example, here the map here, the red mark being demarcated in the Indo-Gangetic plain region by the Ganges river system, the Yamuna and the Ganges in the Gangetic plain region have got more inundation because of flood. In the Assam, in the Brahmaputra basin has got a region which is inundated. At the same time, in the West Bengal region, in the Bengal region by these Hooghly and the Ganga river systems, in the Orissa coastal region, in the Andhra Pradesh coastal regions have been demarcated apart from the Gujarat coastal regions. Depicting the region thematically with a map is very much important apart from description. For example, another map I like to show you. For example, this is a map showing you a drought prone region. Apart from this, so in the same way, this is a map which is depicting a region which is being subjected to inundation because of floods. In the same way, for example, a map need to be depicted the coastal regions or the regions which are being more subjected to cyclones. So you need to draw a map and demarcate a region which is being subjected to inundation. So for example, now I will be discussing you regarding drought. So in the same way, for the purpose of drought, you need to draw a rough sketch of the India map, and you need to mention the regions which are being subjected to drought. For example, see this, an arid region means a desert region where the impact of drought is more. So this is the rain shadow region in the eastern side of the Western Ghats which is experiencing drought. Parts of Rajasthan, western parts of Rajasthan, northwestern parts of Gujarat and the Ladakh region are experiencing drought. So with the depiction in terms of the intensity of the color, which is showing you that the regions which are being subjected to drought more and the regions which are not being subjected to drought. So apart from the description being given to you, the consequences, mitigative measures, remedial measures, preventive measures, you must be able to discuss regarding these kind of natural disasters. Apart from depicting you in terms of map is much more essential, so that it gives an idea to an examiner that you have got a clear-cut idea regarding a disaster. So for example, in the case of flood preparedness, now you have come to know the reasons for the occurrence of floods. Knowing a elevated region, so when you know the elevated region in your place, you can escape to that place to save yourself. Having a strong rope so that it can help somebody else to save. Stock fresh water, dry food, waterproof baggages, turn off electrical appliances before leaving the house so that you can save certain short circuiting. In case of diarrhea, use raw tea, sugar and salt, so that the salt content and the mineral content in your body is been maintaining, avoiding diarrhea is a flood preparedness. So in the case of drought, is an acute scarcity of water, food and employment having adverse impact on vegetation, animals and humanity. So when you need to write regarding what drought is, so this is what drought is. So even though the availability of precipitation is less, if you know how to manage the water by using different kinds of irrigative techniques, you don't suffer with drought. But when we don't know how to manage the utilization of water, it may lead to these kind of problem where the scarcity of water, food, employment and adverse impact on vegetation, animals and humanity together constituted as drought. So 75% of agricultural land in India is prone to drought. That is one of the statistics which you have to show. Drought is a slow onset disaster. So because disasters are being classified into sudden onset and slow onset disasters, in the case of a cyclone or in the case of an earthquake especially, which is a sudden onset disaster, but drought gradually occurs to you by a gradual decreasing in the precipitation less than the average precipitation gradually for about a couple of months or so. So regions affected by drought, as I have specified to you in the case of the map being depicted to you, you need to demarcate it with the help of a map. Drought is also caused by improper water management. So when there is precipitation, when you adopt different techniques, for example, deforestation may lead to drought. When you have vegetation, the vertical percolation is more, water table increases. So, even though the precipitation is less than the average, you can cultivate, but if there is no vegetation, it leads to floods and it leads to drought in the summer season. So, deforestation is one of the reasons for drought. Drought affects the poorest in the country. So, because of this reason, what happens is the vulnerable section during drought is people who are having below the average per capita income. So, here rich people who are capable of spending more because of the increasing in the prices, because of less production of food grains, will not be affected because of drought. The people who are being affected are poor. That is, in terms of disaster management, in terms of resource distribution to avoid drought, you must be able to identify the vulnerable section, and you need to protect them by providing the essential resource to the poorest sections who are being impacted in the disaster management during drought. So, drought is being classified. So, how drought is being classified? Drought is being classified into meteorological drought, hydrological drought and agricultural drought. So, what is the difference between this meteorological drought, hydrological drought and agricultural drought? In the case of meteorological drought, which is something related to weather and climatic conditions in the atmosphere, where the moisture available for precipitation in an ecosystem is less, leads to meteorological drought. In the case of hydrological drought, the available water in the water table in the lithosphere is less in the soil. This is being described as a hydrological drought. Agricultural drought is a kind of drought irrespective of the conditions when the water available is not being supplied for irrigation, is known as agricultural drought. Even though there is less precipitation than the average, when you have got an agricultural mechanism of management of water through sprinklers or drip irrigation or mulching, mulching is a mechanism of adding a kind of organic composition like dairy waste, domestic waste, a coir in the soil, helping in the organic content in the soil, helping in storing the moisture more for a longer duration, is a practice of agriculture. Even though the availability of water is less, maintaining soil moisture increases because of these kind of agricultural practices. So, agricultural drought is something related with the improper management of water or irrigation. So, by using the mechanism of irrigation, by using certain practices, you can manage the water supply for the cultivation of crops. So, agricultural drought is something related to unavailability of water for cultivation. So, in this process, the best mechanism is watershed management. So, what do you mean by watershed management? Watershed management is a kind of mechanism where you must be able to identify a catchment region of a river. Catchment region of a river is a topographical region in the higher elevated region where the slope gradient is responsible for collecting the precipitated water which flows into the river channel. So, watershed management is a management where at the catchment region and the command region. The command region is a region after the construction of a dam or a watershed, dam or a check dam. The extent of irrigation being done by a project is known as a command region. So, both in the region which is responsible for collecting the water, which is known as a catchment region, and the region to the extent where agriculture is done, known as the command region, need to be managed in a proper manner, which is known as watershed management. Example is afforestation is an example of watershed management. Constructing check dams helps in percolation of water at the tributaries and streams. Using genetically modified crops which can resist drought. Crop rotation and mixed cropping. You must not cultivate certain crops which like paddy, etc., which requires intensive irrigation. You need to shift for a kind of agriculture or a crop where it doesn't require intensive agriculture. These are all part of disaster management of drought. Alternative livelihood and crop insurance. So, the rural population need to be trained in certain activities apart from agriculture, so that they are not impacted by drought, like small scale industries manufacturing soaps or sealing oil, transport oil or edible oil or etc. The farmers need to be trained in alternative economic activities so that the drought does not impact them, and crop insurance need to be done so that even though there is loss because of a disaster like a cyclone or a drought, the farmer can be saved economically, or the alternative managing mechanisms for disaster management. So, friends, we shall meet in a different topic regarding disaster management. Thank you.